Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Alexander Stubb. I'm the director at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute. I would like to warmly welcome you to our first European COVID Summit, which is co-organized by the European University Institute's School for Transnational Governance and by our wonderful main host, Reform for Resilience Committee. I'm extremely excited about the perspective of today. We're going to have about 4 hours together, and I at least personally plan to learn a lot. Today, we will focus on three main topics around COVID, namely information and the information wars and fake news that's going on. Secondly, vaccines and the vaccine rollout. And then thirdly, we'll be talking about the future of work and what work will mean in the aftermath of COVID. We have, I think, a stellar lineup today of former prime ministers, whom of course are always important. We have commissioners, we have experts, we have scientists, we have professors, we have people from business, and the whole rigmarole. So I really think we're going to learn a lot today. Now, the way in which we'll do it is I'll start by saying a couple of words here in the beginning about the STG, who we are, and about the Reform for Resilience Commission. Then I'll say a few words about COVID and how I see things. And then we move on to our first conversation of the day, which will take place between me and none other than José Manuel Barroso, who is probably the most timely person you could interview because, as you will know, he is the chairman of the Global Alliance for Vaccines, Gavi. So the School of Transnational Governance, you should know, is a school which does governance beyond borders. We're fairly new at the European University Institute in Florence. We're sort of a little bit of a wannabe of a Kennedy School of Government, if you will. We look at things from all kinds of different perspectives and believe that decision making in today's world is not done in a vacuum anymore. So it's not only about politics and government. It's not only about civil service and ministries. It's not only about NGOs and civil society. It's not only about journalism and academia. It's not only about the private sector and business. It goes beyond. And we're trying to understand this. And we're in the business of basically training what we want to see as future leaders, both through a master's program, through executive training, and through fellowships. Now, we are very happy to be the European hub of what has become known or to be known as R4R. In other words, the Reform for Resilience Commission, which basically was set up by George Freeman in London. The other hubs, of course, include Oxford, Harvard, and we have an Asia hub as well. And we're chaired by three preeminent personalities who are all involved with us today. José Manuel Barroso, one of them, Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister of Australia, and then finally we have Michelle Williams from Harvard University, who is the chair. And what we try to do is look at, in a post-COVID world, how we deal with resilience, and we give policy recommendations to G20, G7, OECD, and the like. So on COVID, my 2 cents are the following. Point number one, it is by definition a transnational crisis. It goes across borders. It affects all of us in one way or another. Its impact is, of course, cross-sectoral. And by that, I mean to say that it's about health, it's about economy, it's about politics, it's about society, and it's about work. And a little bit like the virus itself, the actual pandemic mutates and different things happen at different times. I personally believe that when Judgment Day comes for both governments and companies, they will be judged on three things. Governments will be judged on the number of casualties, the rollout of the vaccines, and the bounce back of the economy. The businesses will be judged on the basis of their flexibility and agility. They will be judged on their capacity to do human resources and adapt to the new way in which we work. And of course, they will be judged about whether they've been able to cope with the disruption that COVID brought with it. And this will, of course, change from industry to industry. Now, Ivan Krastev, distinguished scholar and thinker, has put it quite well that we are now in the sort of what he calls a dictatorship of comparisons. What he tries to say a little bit less diplomatically is that what a lot of governments at the moment do is they compare each other on the casualties, on the vaccines, and on the economy. And of course, if you've done badly on one, you usually focus on another. And we're trying to figure out, what the overall balance is. So for instance, on the death toll, we look at countries which have been hardest hit, like the United States, Brazil, Russia, the UK, and to a certain extent also our home country, Italy and Spain. On the vaccines, we look at, well, what are the success stories? So far, it looks like Israel's done quite well. The United Kingdom has done quite well. The United States, Chile, actually, and Europe perhaps lagging a little bit behind. But what's the true story here? Is it, how long is the lag? When is Europe going to come up to par with this? And then finally, on the economic bounce back, the latest figures that we've been looking at from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the OECD are actually quite optimistic. They're telling us that by 21, 22, we're looking at growth rates anywhere between 4 to 5.6%. Of course, remember, growth rates which plummeted last year. So in that sense, everything is relative. And what the commission, the Reform for Resilience Commission, is trying to look at is, okay, how do you become resilient? And what are the key things for a growing economy? More targeted restrictions, fiscal and monetary stimulus, and vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. This is, ladies and gentlemen, what I wanted to say by way of introduction. And now we move to our actual conversation, and I would like to warmly welcome José Manuel Barroso, not only my good friend, but also former Prime Minister of Portugal, current chair of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, co-chair of our Reform for Resilience Committee, and of course also just happened to have been the president of the European Commission in 2 terms as well. Nice to see you, José Manuel. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much for this invitation and also for accepting to be the leader of the European hub of this Reform for Resilience effort. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. And I should have, of course, mentioned that, hey, you are an adjunct professor at the School of Transnational Governance, teaching our students about leadership. Now, on leadership, the first question, José Manuel, I have, you've just been appointed, basically been there for a few months as a chairman of Gavi. And of course, Gavi is a central player in the global rollout of the vaccines. And what are your sort of first impressions and lessons learned for where we are right now in your capacity as chairman of Gavi?
Thank you. First of all, just 2 words about Gavi, what Gavi is. Gavi exists for more than 20 years now. It has been working namely for immunization of children. More than 820 million children have been vaccinated around the world. We estimate at least 14 million lives saved through Gavi effort. And so it's a very interesting organization where we have not only international organizations like the World Health Organization, UNICEF, World Bank, but also the private sector, the Bill Gates Foundation, also industry, civil society organizations. And there is a board, 28 members, the same number I had in the European Commission, also with independent members. The chair is independent, and also representatives of countries, both donor countries and let's say, implementing countries that also are the ones who receive more support from Gavi. And precisely because of that experience of Gavi, for instance, with the polio, measles, or diphtheria, the world turned to Gavi to help in a response to COVID. And in fact, Gavi is now, let's say, the manager of COVAX. You will hear today in this seminar, also Aurélien Guyen is director of precisely COVAX in Gavi. And our goal is to reach until the end of this year 2.1 billion doses of vaccines, mainly focusing on 92 low-income countries. Until now, we already reached 111 economies, around 39 million doses. So what you see, and let's be frank, is that we believe we are still on target, but there are difficulties. And so your question, what did I learn? I learned that we need speed, scale, and quality. I learned that we need true cooperation, but I also have learned, to be very honest with you, that there are negative behavior, that we saw vaccine nationalism, vaccine diplomacy, this is what you mentioned, the dictatorship of comparisons. I've been saying also a beauty contest between some governments. We have seen vaccine hoarding. We have seen trade restrictions. So while I believe we can say science has been great because it has developed vaccines in a record time, politics and others have not always behaved in the proper way. This is my honest assessment at this moment in time, but I believe that if we make a bigger effort, we'll be there achieving our goals to try to control at least the most acute phase of this pandemic.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear because, of course, I mean, we all know that, you know, this is a pandemic. It touches every human being on this planet. And the feeling is very much that, you know, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And if we move on to this sort of vaccine nationalism that you talked about, that we're seeing the hoarding, etc., you know, this is not going to help anyone except the politicians who are trying to show at home that, hey, we're doing well on this thing. Well, I mean, you know, I'm also looking at Gavi because you basically are key in running COVAX. So the access of vaccines to the developing countries, which you just mentioned, and, you know, the target's 2.3 billion to 92 different countries. Now, we are, of course, here focusing on Europe, and we're the hub of Europe, and we know the debate that's going on in Europe. But sort of in your capacity as chairman of the board of Gavi, and to a certain extent also from your experience as Portuguese Prime Minister and President of the European Commission, what's your thinking? You know, you've called the EU to, you need to step up to the plate. You need to do your thing. Why is it important for the EU to do this? Because, I mean, looks like the EU is a bit in trouble itself in the rollout, no?
Yes, but we have to think, very frankly, we have to think counterfactually. As you know, Alex, yourself, a former politician, politics is also about alternatives. And the question is, would the European Union be better if instead of having a cooperative approach, for instance, for buying vaccines, they will be competing among themselves? I really believe that will be a disgrace for Europe, much disruptive for the European Union, and by the way, also for the rest of the world. Some probably will get vaccines a little bit earlier, but some probably not have yet vaccines at all. So I think it was the right approach. Recently, I spoke, by the way, with Ursula von der Leyen, the current Commission President, and I believe she's making a great effort. But let's be honest, there were also some difficulties in the process of rollout. Having said that, I'm very happy with the commitment of the European Union to COVAX. As you know, COVAX, it's not only Gavi, it's with UNICEF, it's with CEPI, it's also with the World Health Organization, and they are committed to distribute excess doses through COVAX. That's an important point because there are countries and regions that have many more doses, or at least they have contracts for many more doses than what they actually will need. For instance, we estimate that Europe at this moment has 1.6 billion more doses assured that they could share, hopefully through COVAX, so that that can be done in an equitable manner. And I believe that Europe can continue to be one of the greatest promoters of equity and an equitable approach around the world. The reality is that if you look at European Union today, it's one of the two biggest donors in the world for COVAX, together with the United States. To be fair, the United States have increased enormously their contribution to COVAX through Gavi. And so I'm thankful to the European Union, what they are doing globally. They are committed to do globally. I believe now there are some issues there were some problems of supply coming from some companies. There were some problems of management of the situation. But frankly, I believe a lot of the criticism is not really founded. And the alternative to the cooperative approach of the European Union would have been a much worse and more disruptive situation.
Yeah, and I guess, you and I, as former prime ministers from small countries, fully understand this as well. And I would actually, like to give a lot of credit to the European Commission and the work that they've done, of course, with the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, and of course, with the leadership of the Commission President, of Breton and many others who are working on. And interesting enough, I think the Commission came yesterday out with a figure that now the EU has exported over 100 million doses, which I think is quite a good move on this. And in many ways, this is about soft power, isn't it? I mean, both for the United States and for Europe. But one of the big problems, and you and I know this, is the communication. It's not exactly going like in Hollywood. But hey, I mean, okay, you were Commission President for 2 terms, and you were there in the beginning of the financial crisis in 2008. And I remember that time personally. I think it was one of the roughest. It must have been much, much tougher for you. But do you think the EU has learned, if you compare the way in which it dealt with the crisis in 2008 and onwards to the COVID crisis, what has the EU learned? Has it improved its crisis management?
I think it has learned, and without the experience of the first, let's say, crisis you've mentioned, financial and sovereign debt crisis, we will not have had some of the, at least partial success we are seeing now. And I explain why. Because some taboos were broken then. For instance, the monetary action of the ECB, that is now possible and acceptable. It was not acceptable at that time. You remember well, also, not only as a former prime minister, as a minister of finance, Alex. So why? Because the ECB, probably rightly, they were putting as a question, as a preliminary condition, some measures taken by the governments for fiscal responsibility, for common, let's say, management of the problem and we launched it through the EFSM, EFSF, afterwards the European Stability Mechanism. By the way, at that time, the UK was with us, and the UK was accepting the first, but said no more. So one of the differences was in this crisis that there was not the veto of the United Kingdom, to be very frank. And also Germany changed their position, also because I believe, and that was the tone of the discussion in the Bundestag, because they saw rightly that this crisis now is an exogenous crisis that was affecting everybody. There could not be the argument of the moral hazard, just helping those that were not behaving properly. So that argument that was used before, why should we support those that were not behaving properly from a financial point of view? That was not all the case now, because everybody was being affected. In fact, from the north to the south, from the center to the periphery. And it was possible to do what before was not possible in terms of some debt mutualization and some, let's say, really global approach, and at a stronger or a speed. That was positive. But unfortunately, I have to say, now there are some difficulties still, as you well know. The decision of the Constitutional Court in Germany also is projecting some shadow about the resilience and recovery program. We don't know, to be honest, we don't know when, in fact, it's going to start to be implemented. And that is, once again, one of the problems we have with our European Union is that by definition, it's incremental. It takes time to take decisions. Sometimes it's very frustrating. But by and large, I will say that the European Union this time has been reacting in a swifter manner with more determination, and that some lessons were learned from previous crises. Yes.
And this brings me back to what you said in the beginning. I'm looking here at my notes. You talked about speed, scale, and quality. And to a certain extent, this is exactly what the EU has done. I mean, if you compare the ESM of the 2008 crisis, it took 4 years. If you compare the package that was put together, which in many ways, and I hesitate to use the word, was historic, it actually took this time only 4 months. And I do agree with you. You know, I mean, there's still some people who are trying to somehow frame this COVID European crisis to a north-south divide. I think those people don't understand that there's a fundamental difference between 2008 and 2020. And actually, Marco Butti and George Papakonstantinou are coming out with a good paper on this really soon. My next and second to last question, Jose Manuel, is that the EU, of course, has a lot of work to ahead of it. You know, it's a constant crisis management. You go from one crisis to another, and you know you always have big dossiers on the table. Now it has the vaccines, it has the recovery and resilience instrument, it has the Green Deal, it talks about geopolitical union and the rest of it. If you were Commission President at the moment, what would be your focus?
Look, I had my own good group of crises. You remember, not only the financial sovereign debt crisis, but we had the real problem of invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So a truly geopolitical crisis. We had energy crisis, suspension of gas supplies to Europe because of Ukraine. It was the 31st of December that I received a call from Mr. Putin telling me, José Manuel, I want to give you an early warning. Tomorrow there will be no more gas for Europe, not because of you, but because the Ukrainians are not behaving rightly. So I had my own set of crises, and afterwards we had also, as you know, the start of the refugee crisis. Now, of course, the focus should be, I believe, precisely on putting an end to this pandemic, both and acting, and by the way, as you said at the beginning, not only from a health perspective, trying to control the pandemic, but also to make the economy fit for a rebound. I believe, in fact, that according to the European Union and also IMF and others, the rebound can be much bigger and faster than most people are expecting. So I'm not so pessimistic. And this is what we should be focused on, more on the medium term. But of course, medium term has already started. We have, of course, this green transition and the digital transition that makes sense from all points of view for Europe to be more competitive and also for our economy to be more sustainable. And I believe there is a broad consensus, including, by the way, with our younger people in Europe, about the need to do more for a sustainable economy and for a more digitally ready economy, because what's going on in that sector is very important. And I very much support all the ideas that have been now put forward. I remember it was not so many years ago about the need of a European, let's say, strategic autonomy, not against others, but in fact, European Union to be less naive and to understand that, for instance, we have to be able, in case of emergency like this one, to have sufficient access to supply chains, that we cannot be completely over-reliant on others. So I believe that idea of European sovereignty, if it is properly expressed, not a closed, not chauvinism, not a kind of European nationalism, but a kind of a European sovereignty, I think it makes sense. And I believe this is possible now. It was not possible before. I remember one day when I was in the commission, discussing this with some people in the European Parliament, I spoke about the European interest. And one said to me, Mr. President, what about the values? Why do you speak only about interest? No, it is our interest to defend our values. We need to be, let's say, realistic about this. We need to stand by our values, but to understand that we will only be able to do so if you are strong enough to defend our interests.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure you've felt this as well. I mean, being commission president is a bit of a mission impossible, because if you do something good, the member states and the prime ministers and the rest of them take the credit. If you do something bad, they always blame you. It's never their own fault. My final question, Jose Manuel, is linked to Italy and Prime Minister Mario Draghi. Together with, he's of course has the G20 presidency at the moment, and together with the European Commission, they have called for a global health summit. I think it takes place in May. If you were to give 3 key recommendations for this health summit, perhaps not preempting, but giving a little bit of a hint what we're going to propose to them, what would be your 3 key recommendations to G20 at the moment?
To my very good friend Mario Draghi, with whom I spent some difficult nights in the Brussels meetings, I will say 3 things. First of all, that summit should really agree on a truly cooperation approach, multilateral approach. And by that I mean an effort to draw some lessons of what already happened and to try to define some lines for the future in terms precisely of resilience of our economies and resilience in the health sector. And that's why the work of the Commission that you are doing, Alex, and I'm so proud that the School of Transnational Governance, the European University Institute is part of it, is also important. It's a contribution. We are now thinking, how will the world be in the future? I believe there will be great developments, for instance, in technology and science, but we have to see all the developments. So a truly cooperation approach. Secondly, a commitment to end this pandemic, basically through COVAX, but not only through COVAX, the ACT Accelerator, because COVAX is vaccines, but COVAX is part of a global effort called the ACT Accelerator that includes also therapeutics and diagnostics. And this is important. Another final point will be commitment to dose sharing, because it's now obvious that it's not only with some more money, financial commitments that will be great that the richest countries will do. This afternoon, I will co-chair with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, United States government. We will co-chair investment opportunity to raise $2 billion more to fill the gaps we still have financially until the end of the year. But besides the financial effort, I believe it's important that there is a truly commitment to dose sharing for those who have surplus doses. So if this is done, the COVAX commitment, the dose sharing, and the cooperative approach for the future for health resilience, I think it will be a great success. And I trust that Italy, with its, let's say, political intelligence, and Mario Draghi will be great to lead this effort together, of course, with the European Commission.
Well, Jose Manuel, it doesn't get much more practical than that. You have basically just given the 3 key points to the G20 conclusions, and we hope to see them there. With these words, I'd really like to thank you for your participation and the work that you're doing. It's always fun to talk to you. And to our audience, global audience, I hope both in the United States, in Europe, Asia, everywhere around, I think the outlook for our day today is really exciting. First, in the next session, which will be chaired by Madeleine de Kock-Boening, who is also chairman of the board of our EDMO, European Digital Media Observatory Fighting Fake News, has a stellar panel together with Commissioner Vera Jourova, Siada El Ramli, and former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull. In terms of housekeeping, the questions have been sent in advance. We will take them into consideration. This event will be recorded, and I will finish by saying that these types of events are never organized by people like me. So what I want to say is that if you think this has been a success, you should be thanking Jonas Brendenbach and his team. If you think it's been a failure, it's all of my fault. With these words, I hand it over to Madeleine and wish everyone a nice day, and I'll catch up with you in the concluding session. Thank you, Jose Manuel. See you later.
Thank you.